Podcasting from the Lone Star State in Southern California, you're listening to the Coma Podcast with Cody and Matt.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Coma Cast. It is July 13, 2021, and we thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're here again. We took off last week. It was July 4th, and was it? I don't know. Was it? I don't know. It wasn't, was it?
It was. So we kind of had a little bit of a, it wasn't an intentional break. That's usually when our breaks happen. We almost have never been able to actually plan like, oh, we're going to take 4 days off. So it just depends on when we record, but here
we really haven't missed that many days this week. Like our first year, we were like,
first year was hard because the pandemic hit. We had a really good momentum going. Like things were going really well for us. Like, you know, we expected it to be very, very slow because nobody knew who we were. And I'm not sure tons of people really know who we are unless you're in Iceland or New Zealand. Thanks, y'all. But we would miss 3 or 4 weeks at a time because of stress and some other thing. And then with everybody working from home and all the students also being home, the internet couldn't support it. We had a lot of tech issues. It would take us 6-7 hours to record 1 or 2 things, which anybody that's ever recorded anything, even if you get everything right on the first take, there are still things that need to be cut. You might go, wow, that was great. Oh my God, we totally skipped a page. Or, oh, I meant to write that down. And you're just like, okay.
Well, sometimes we both, I know for sure me, but like, I'll like go off topic, which isn't, the conversation isn't bad, but okay. It's like sometimes I go way like off topic.
Yeah, it's like, and that's okay. It never bothered me because it makes me think of other things that maybe we weren't planning to talk about. And I think it makes the conversation more genuine, which was one of my goals for this. One thing I don't like about podcasts and anything I ever did with media was how scripted it had to be to the second. Now, if we're ever in a position that we had to be in that, there's a different side of me that comes out when that's necessary. But here that isn't necessary. We can let our personality shine. We can just be ourselves. We can talk about what we want to talk about. And the whole idea behind Cody and Matt was that we are Cody and Matt, not some version that we want people to believe we are. Because between this Twitter and what if we do ever get out there in the world and people see us or interact with us, you would know very quick if we were putting on some kind of facade. Like social media is real.
Everything y'all see and hear is Matt. It's the real Matt.
It is definitely 100% me. But if it wasn't, somebody would sell us out so fast. Like, Cody and Matt, they're actually awful people, and it would take seconds. And then, until some burner account is all like, hi, I'm secretly Cody. And, like posting all these horrible things I do in post-production. You guys, that is a nightmare. He's currently beating an intern over a coffee.
Oh my God.
So who knows?
On Sunday night, we talked about what would be our
our diva demands.
Our diva demands. And so if you haven't checked that out, we're not going to mention them here. I'm going to say, go check out our Sunday show. It's on yes. YouTube. And you can check out and watch it. It was a fun show last night on Sunday. So be sure. And check that out.
He heard that one. He heard that. You know what's coming up, Cody, that I think that we should make kind of a big deal about?
What?
You know what? You remember what next month is?
Well, I know it's August, but I don't know what it's coming.
Our 100th episode is inching closer.
That's right. I actually was going.
I don't know exactly when exactly it is, but I know it's next month sometime. One of the episodes should land on 100, and I think that it's a big deal, and I think we should. We should do like a big party for it.
Guess what, though? It's happening on Friday the 13th. August 13th is our 100th show. I didn't know that, but that is the day. I was telling Matt about this actually because I knew that we were getting close to being our 100th show and that we're going to do something special. And it's going to be a live show, which is going to be fun. And so we can do some fun things. So be sure, everybody, mark your calendar, August 13th.
Join us. I would love to do some kind of like trivia giveaway, or like we'll put everybody's names into a hat and draw them, be like, oh, you get this, or you get that, or you get,
Yeah, we'll have some stuff. I actually last night, Matt, after I told you this, I was trying to put something on the TV while I was finishing cleaning up the kitchen, and there was something I knew I was going to watch. But then before I did that, I went and just checked to make sure everything looked good from last night's feed. And if you go to our YouTube page, you can see the very first live that we ever did in like April of 2020. And whoa, it's rough. It is rough. The quality is like not great. It's grainy.
It's pretty bad.
And
we didn't really know how we were going to do it, and we didn't really know what to do. So you were like, do you want to do it? I said, yeah, let's do it. So we hopped on.
Well, and that was the period of time I would put things on screen and you couldn't see them. And you couldn't see them because there was also a delay. So you could hear me and see me kind of, but then anything I put on screen was delayed like forever. Yeah. And then also just like I don't want to say our personalities, but our presence on screen was like not the greatest. It's definitely improved if you compare the two. And I was just skimming through. I didn't watch the whole thing. And I will have to pull a clip and we'll have to play it because we are going to talk about this soon, because I'll be talking about Matt's book. But on that podcast or that live, the very first live, you actually were talking about writing the book. And it is so interesting.
So I actually started it in March of 19. I wrote an excerpt, what would become chapter 1. And I just wrote it as to kind of see if anybody was interested in it. So I gave it to 4 people, one of them being David, and said, hey, is this a story you would read? If this was the opening chapter, are you interested in what is happening? Or are you like, this is too dry, this is too this? It was maybe 600 to 1,000 words. So not a long, it's like a page and a half, but more than what you would read off the back of the book, but less than, a 10-page, story arc. And all the responses I got back were really positive. So I held on to that until May, when I quit my job in May of 19. And then I would sit down and write 1,000 or 2,000 words, another couple thousand. And I remember getting to like 23,000 and I was stuck there for a bit. I was stuck in the 20,000s, and then it just I do remember on the live how painful it was because of the delay, and we were having internet issues. The lighting was rough on all of us.
I know, even mine. I was like, okay, this is not okay.
Yeah, I watched it not too long ago. That's funny that you brought that up.
I do also want to mention coming up tomorrow on the 14th is recognized internationally as Non-Binary People's Day. Now, of course, this is occasion to shine a light on those who identify as non-binary and celebrate the rich diversity in our community, just another part of the LGBTQ community. I think that's important because I feel like for many people, they don't think of the others in the community and others around them, and maybe some of the struggles that they're going through and the struggles that the world is putting on them. We, of course, have seen that with trans issues specifically, but again, so important to highlight that. Hopefully coming up in our new fall lineup of shows, we'll hopefully get to talk to somebody who's non-binary and specifically talk about what they have to go through and some of those difficulties. When we do this podcast, we can speak to certain things and we can speak to a highlight of certain issues, but when it comes to specific actual things that someone experiences, we can't always speak to everything.
Right. It's important to recognize that too. It's like, yeah, this is a platform to educate. And so it's like, yes, we can give you technically a definition or maybe how it's used in the community, but neither of us are non-binary. So it would really not be appropriate for us to, other than define what non-binary is defined as, that would be about it. I can't speak to what day-to-day life would be like, or someone who identifies as non-binary interacting with the world and how the world interacts with them. And I think, like Cody said, we can talk about it, but we can't really speak for it or for it in really any sense.
The 14th recognize International Non-Binary People's Day. And maybe you yourself, if you don't know much about it, just do a little Googling and research that. That's the great thing about the internet. Everyone has the option to Google something and learn something. You don't even necessarily have to ask somebody. You can find all the information there, and it's in depth. People who are non-binary have written about it. And so if you have any questions, it's all right there. Now, some things happening around the United States and I think, around the world, in particular, one case in Boston. Now, the Boston Pride, Matt, this is crazy. They're abruptly shutting down because the community, quote, needs and wants change. Now, after more than 50 years in operation, Boston Pride has decided to stop operating and they will dissolve almost immediately. That's going to happen. Now, that's crazy. So they were, in the planning process of doing a Pride parade. It had been rescheduled from June and was going to happen this fall. So that's up in the air now, what's going to happen with that. But the whole Boston Pride organization is dissolved. And this all comes because the trans community was basically saying that Boston Pride was not representing them. Boston Pride was not representing everybody in the community in the way that should be happen. And so people in the community rose up and said, this is not okay. And you had trans community and others joining the trans community having marches in June on their own without Boston Pride helping. And so, in this case, it seems that Boston Pride couldn't change in the way that needed to happen, and so they're dissolving. So I think ultimately this could be a good thing. Something will come out of it better that maybe represents more people like it should be happening. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing that was happening.
I'm surprised it was so abrupt. And speaking of Pride, actually, so West Hollywood replaced the crosswalk's rainbow flag design with the Progress Pride flag, which is, if you've seen it in this past year, it's become more inclusive of everybody in the community, which I think is great. It's also nice. I know a lot of people like to hold on to this is how it's done. Okay, doing things because that's the way it was always done is not really a good way to keep doing things sometimes, because we evolve and shift just like language does. So it's important that, we update, we just stay with the times. It's not a big deal. Ultimately, it's a piece of fabric. It's just being used to show, hey, there's more of us, because most people say the gay community, and what they really mean is everybody, but they use the word gay as kind of a catch-all. Well, we're kind of shifting away from that, and which is a good thing, because when you say, oh, the gays, you're referring to Cody and I, not Cody and I, the lesbians down the street, and the trans couple up the street. We're individuals. We are people. We are not, yes, we're part of a population, but we're people too. So West Hollywood became the first city to have the rainbow crosswalks permanently installed instead of just during the Pride festivities in 2012. The project will cost $85,000, which that's like a drop in the bucket for a city. Some contractors just got some jobs, and hopefully, I really hope it doesn't, they don't have to spend lots of money keeping it. Yeah.
I mean, I think
we're going to hope for the best.
It is West Hollywood. So I think people, unless it's someone within the community itself wanting to deface something, people pretty much know it's there. I think the one thing that I noticed during Pride, I mentioned this to Matt, not on camera and on the podcast, but off, that I was really happy to see that, lots of organizations and companies in different places that celebrate Pride and make a point of making it part of bringing in the community, they were using the Progress Pride flag instead of the regular Pride flag. And I thought that was great, because a lot of the I mean, none of the arguments against it came from necessarily outside of the community. It was people within the community complaining about the change in the flag. And it's like, why are you doing that? And I told Matt it was so annoying, but I was glad because, these companies and everything pushing that, and basically every flag they make is the progress flag. It pretty much leaves no options for those people who want to complain about that.
I just don't understand why people get so angry about something like that shifting, but that's okay.
Yeah. I never understood that. It was like, it's a flag. Like, why are you going to get so like upset about it? You're just wasting your energy. Some, I don't want to say good news, but it is good news temporarily, I guess. Hopefully, maybe something good will come out of it. But an injunction blocks the new Tennessee law that requires anti-trans signs on business bathrooms. Now, House Bill 1182, which we had talked about previously, called for signs reading, quote, "This facility has a policy of allowing the use of restrooms by either biological sex," will not go in effect while a lawsuit against it proceeds. So we'll see where that lawsuit comes from, or what happens with the lawsuit.
It's so frustrating because before it became, trans people became, the punching bag in the news, people have been going to the bathroom since the beginning of time. So you've been using the bathroom with trans people just fine. And I'm pretty sure your bathroom at home is not boys or girls. So
I know. And
it's a piece of porcelain that you piss in. Jesus.
A lot of small businesses didn't have a men's and women's restrooms. They maybe had one or two restrooms, and it was for whoever goes into it. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I've always kind of felt like restrooms should just be like whatever. I mean, if you've ever been to a gay club, like, you know what I mean? Like, it don't matter. As now, obviously, that depends on people being respectful. But if you think that a sign stops anybody, and when you have to pee, you do not care where you need to go because it just hits you, and it's like, well, gotta go. Going now. Oh, I went.
Yeah.
So speaking of some of our favorite topics here with the LGBTQ and trans people and things going on in the news. So China just deleted dozens of LGBTQ pages from one of its largest social networks. So the pages offered help to the country's isolated LGBTQ population, and activists fear their removal as part of a larger crackdown on gay content and support groups. That is also not surprising. But again, here we are.
Yeah, it's not surprising at all. I mean, your China's, we talked about recently, Russia and different countries in that vicinity and region. And so, while things are not perfect in the United States, many people don't have to worry as much as people in countries like this. And so I think it's important to like realize there's more people outside of your neighborhood or your friend group and the things that they're going on. I feel like sometimes we just like get bogged down and we don't really maybe read the news or realize what's happening in the larger world with people within our community and the extreme struggles that are happening to them. And, many of these pages were the only way for anybody within that community to communicate with each other. Right. And now with them closed down, it makes it an even more difficult situation. But, that's one thing that
about, like just because, right, we do have it better here than our community members in a lot of other countries. But although we have it better here, it doesn't mean we stop pushing to continue making it better for everyone around us, because we should be the example. We have the freedom here. We should make sure it continues, because we all have seen any of those little freedoms and rights. They'll chip away at those in seconds. It took a stroke of a pen for the Trump administration to revoke a whole bunch of shit, and another stroke of the pen for the Biden administration to undo that just to get us back to where we were. And it was just a stroke of a pen. But once it's done, everyone's like, oh, who cares? Like, let's not worry about that. There's bigger things happening. Well, there's bigger things happening but it's those little things that they just chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away.
Yeah, and in those instances, it's important to, push your Congress people to pass laws that protect those instances so that they can't be these orders from the president, and it can't be flip-flopping back and forth. And so that's why it's important to push your Congress people to pass laws that help the community. But that's where we are. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about love. Now, we have a lot to say about this. Me and Matt have talked about this before a lot off camera, about relationships. And, sometimes we look and it's like relationships can be easy. And some people I feel like question like, oh, how can y'all have a relationship? But have you seen what you post on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera? But we'll be talking about all of that coming up next. Okay, and we are back. And today we're going to be talking about love. Love is amazing. It's fun. It can be painful. And it's a journey. When me and Matt have talked about this in the past, I guess for me, it's like, did I ever think I would find love? I did. Did I think it would happen the way it did? No, I did not. And I think that happens for a lot of people. I think it's sometimes a surprise and shocking. Like, you're usually not looking for it necessarily.
I'd agree with that. I mean, obviously every situation is different. I just think that, so one thing I read a lot is basically, Netflix and butt touches, and that is not really accurate. But also people like to pretend that that's a new thing. Having studied now about 10 generations of my family, every member of my family, step family, non-related, biological, half related, whatever. And we've not changed as people. It's more on display. I would say people have acknowledged that it's not what you think, as personal practices and preferences, and it's become more acceptable to voice your opinion, because people think that, I don't know about you, but I was kind of almost conditioned to think that when you're with somebody, you're supposed to just be like all about them all the time. And then of course that burns, that candle burns bright and then it burns out, if you're like that. And that very quickly didn't work for me, because even as a teenager, what I saw happening around me is my friends started dating, and you have those first kind of relationships, and you're just like, I don't like this, like this isn't working for me. And you learn that everybody feels things differently and processes things differently. And people don't like to have conversations that they might think are awkward or intrusive or invasive. And sometimes you have to have all those conversations, because it's going to come out one way or the other. Spend every day with somebody, unless you're a really good secret keeper. And, and we talked about this a little bit before camera. So for example, David and I, we have a kind of like an open topic policy between us. Like, anything that we want to talk about is available. That's it. There's nothing, we don't get pissy about some guy from our past, or, because there's the whole thing of like people, I'm like, there's like 8 billion people in this world. Stop it. Love is a chemical reaction. It's a beautiful reaction, but it can be measured chemically, but that does not take the magic out of it. It just means, a little bit, how it works.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me when people are in a relationship, and then like, sometimes people are still friends with their ex, but then their new partner, it just gets so upset about that. And it's like, there's like a jealousy factor that comes into play there. And it's like, is that relationship going to last? Probably not, because, if there's no trust there has to be trust in that relationship. I think it's also for people in the LGBTQ community, it's kind of a tough thing initially, because like I think it's getting easier now, obviously, but younger people, when you see like your friends dating people, but then if you're gay and at the, we look back a few years, there, you might not necessarily know anybody. Like if you're in elementary, junior high, you might not know someone who's gay, or they might be in the closet. And then, there's a whole dynamic there that people don't necessarily get to participate in as openly as heterosexual kids and teenagers. I think that's an interesting psychological thing, that you can look at. Thankfully, I do think that things are changing now. And so younger people are getting to experience that same, young love, which can be fun. Obviously, that's not necessarily always a lasting love, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, which I think is.
I feel like a lot of times our population and community miss out on that because you're so bent on trying to fit into this narrative. And even if you do experience it, we often screw it up because we're trying to apply everything that was taught to us to this relationship, which is normal, very normal, but it doesn't work because it's not who you are. And you always kind of feel like you don't fit. And especially I think for our more masculine presenting community members, people, the ones that are so shocked when, they come out and they get told, oh, what a waste, by other members. And I'm like, that's, rude. But it's just what it is, unfortunately, because as we're shifting and people are more, like you said, they're able to experience this in a little bit more of a safe environment. And depending on where you are in our country, I mean, we have a huge country, so not everywhere is comfortable. And even in comfortable places, just because it's okay doesn't mean you're willing to step out and identify yourself as part of a very small part of the population, which that can be scary. Even now, there's moments where it's like, it kind of makes you, a little jittery. But, you get to do all those exciting things like move in with each other and learn about each other. And people don't have conversations enough. I found like often the conversations around sex don't involve preferences and things you're into. It more so involves, oh, what's your body count?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just, and that's not really a productive conversation. If it's something that you both want to talk about, you should. And if it's something that's really important to you, you should tell your partner that, because they need to know that that's important to you. Because later when you out with this thing that even if they think it's completely ridiculous, it's important to you, and they've not even had a chance to talk you through it and say, well, why is this important to you? Why does that matter? Like, why does then matter to now? And of course I was also raised, to be a certain way, and just didn't like that. One thing I got advice from my grandmother in, I want to say, probably my freshman year of college, sophomore year, when I was still, 19, 20, pretty fit still and everything. I always wear jeans and hoodies. Even right at this moment, I am. And my grandmother's like, I know you're really conservative with like how you dress. She's like, but I can tell you that your body does not stay. And however you should be proud of yourself for how you look, no matter how you look. So don't be afraid to go to the beach and wear the swim shorts you want to wear. Basically, the conversation was, she's like, when I was your age, I covered myself up everywhere because that's what I was taught. And I didn't like how I looked, and I complained about myself. And then now I'm not 20 anymore. It was kind of like, basically the enjoy your youth, and wear sunscreen. But that's something I think that that is something that's also shifting back to the forefront of people feeling comfortable with themselves and body positivity. And that's so important because life is short. And when you're with somebody, when you're with somebody, you're with them, and you're with them on the good days when everybody sees when they're feeling like $1 million, and you see them when they look literally like the exact same person, but in their head, that's not what they feel like. And, it's important to have those conversations, whether you're the partner or when you're the person who feels like absolute shit that day. Learning to communicate with your partner and build that relationship is important. And if they can't talk to you or they don't listen to you, there's other problems there. You don't have to stuff yourself back into a box to make them comfortable. Yeah, is there a time and place for some conversations? Totally. But if you never get to have any of the conversations, I promise that those really uncomfortable conversations are going to come bursting out at the worst possible time. And you will not feel any shame.
I found that, like from the beginning, if possible, to just be open and honest as possible. And then things from there are so much easier because there is no secrets. Right. There's nothing hidden. You feel comfortable talking about anything and everything. And so nothing is ever weird. Nothing is ever necessarily awkward. It just, you have a conversation. It is what it is. And you move on. I also have found as you are in a relationship longer, me and Matt have talked about this many times, but that there is, there's things that happen in a relationship. You may be doing this project, or you might be doing whatever it may be, and there's a time and place for you maybe not to speak, and you have there's times and places to have conversations about certain things, and then other times it's just like your comment is not needed. Otherwise, if it does happen.
Yeah, time and place, because you still have to live with this person when this project is over. And if you're the type of person who gets angry and slaps below the belt when you're mad or you're frustrated, yeah, so when your project is over, you might just brush up, like, well, that's just how I am.
Well, and I've also found, like, just don't say anything. And then after some time's passed, it's not even an issue for you anymore. So you're glad that you didn't say anything.
Yeah, sometimes it is important to say, oh, well, enough. And you don't say anything, which it might be hard to believe because you guys just see us on camera. But when we're on camera, our job is to interact. So that's our job. But with our partners, it's very different. Like, obviously you almost never see. We did the one interview with David, which was hilarious. But, David has lots to say. You just have to talk to him. But I don't drag him into this because we've lived and worked together for a very, very, very long time. So it's important to allow each other that space. I'm sitting in our room at a desk right now working on this, and our door is open. He's 10 feet away playing a video game on the other side of the wall. But we don't criticize each other. We don't, he doesn't offer unasked for opinions on projects I do, but he does listen to the podcast sometimes, and he'll be the first to tell you, oh, half the time I don't listen to it. It's not my thing. But that's okay, because he tells me that he always makes sure I have the space I need to record with Cody. And he encouraged, when I came up with this idea, he was the first person I suggested it to. I was like, what do you think of this idea? He's like, that is not my thing. He's like, but I could totally see there being an interest for that. And then in my head was like, oh, I don't really care if people have an interest. I still want to do it. That's again, maybe one of my more charming flaws or positives, depending on how you look at me. But when I brought it to Cody, he obviously was like, oh, I think we should do this. But you also ran it by Justin, was like, well, what do you think? Because you defer to your partner sometimes for ideas, thoughts, different opinions, because even though it's not David's thing, he is definitely sometimes been like, have you thought about talking about this? Or there's this thing, or like we talked about Matthew Shepard, who's like, I don't know who that is. Like, he's only 5 years younger than me, but it's a big difference in when I was 14-ish when that happened, he was 9. So 9 and 14 are a big different. 30 and 35 are not, Yeah. So, you have these things, and all of love is weird, and it takes so many forms too. Like we were talking about before. So I saw the script and I didn't know that was going to be our main topic today. And what it made me think of is how Cody and I are open with Justin and David respectively. It it impacts our dynamic on how we interact as friends, because our partners are not jealous people. They're not possessive of us. They don't care. They're never reading our phones or over our shoulders. So Cody and I have this freedom that I learned that a lot of people, well, I know a lot of people don't have, because they're just like, oh, I can't believe you said that. You have a husband. I'm like, yeah. And he's a whole ass person and a grown ass adult who can stand on his own 2 feet. You know?
My other favorite thing when it's concerning that and someone like mentions that, it's like, yeah, they know about it.
Yeah, this isn't some secret thing. Like
they saw her red
off a room of our house. In fact, to me, for a long time, people thought Cody and I were together, which was even funnier. I was like, oh, I'm still young. I got it. Yay.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, but it does make things like interacting with various people on Twitter from all around the world. There's definitely when people put in their unasked for opinions about you or me, we've encountered that here. People have expressed opinions on what they do and don't like. You know, some people like that Cody's a lot more, he comes across a lot more professional than I do. You know, you guys just don't see him on camera. But they don't like that I just express myself and that Cody should moderate more, or that they think I should take my shirt off when we're doing these. I'm like, well, you know, I'm only an object in the bedroom with my consent. So let's keep that in mind. And consent matters, even in a relationship. Like, you don't say yes to everything just because you're with them, because just because they're your partner doesn't mean they know everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Just when you need to let them know that they're wrong, maybe not in the middle of an IKEA project. That is
oh dear.
Just step back and let them do whatever they're doing and say, let me get you some lemonade.
What is, we kind of talked about this, I guess, in the podcast where we talked to David, but what is one of your favorite things about your relationship with David?
I would say that he very much encourages me to be myself, for my own hopes and dreams, what things I want to do. I mean, we support each other. We don't ever do anything that's a detriment to the other. We find a way to make it work for the other. So his encouragement of me loving myself and supporting myself, you know, like, oh, we joke a lot about Starbucks, but I never buy myself stuff. So I grew up never buying myself stuff. Now, I like buying things for other people. I like buying things for David. I like buying things for the house if we need to. But I really like I bought a few new shirts the other day. And I was like, David, what do you think? He's like, just goddamn buy them, you know? But, you know, it's something that you learn. And he doesn't care if I go hang out with friends or go places. Like, you know, I want to come to San Diego. He's like, he is so over it to the point that he's ready to just buy the tickets of his himself. Because I'm just like, you know, a little, you know, I get anxious. And as I've gotten older, some of these anxieties have gotten worse. And he supports me in a way where he does his best not to enable them. But at the same time, like, when I've hit my limit and he's like, okay, all right, you know, because I am a person and I have limits, and those limits change as you get older. In some ways, I'm a lot more forthcoming, and I've worked really hard to be, you know, open with people and be more not genuine, but showing everybody more sides of my personality, not just when I'm being weird. Now, granted, being the weird part, that is like the dominant force, but it's not all of it. And that it's okay to express to people that when you do this, you hurt my feelings and I don't like it. So David encourages all of that. And I think that it helps me be a more complete, authentic person all the time, not just, you know, I'm a big proponent of saying that even in friendships, that I don't like when that happened, when it's still a conversation, when it's like, hey, I didn't really enjoy that so much. And rather than 6 months from now, man, you're a real big pain in the ass and it blows up. I think there was one thing you were really trying to get done with something we were doing. And it was a topic that I wasn't comfortable talking about anyway. And we were trying to get through it. But you were like, something was like happening behind you. And you're like, I need to go. And I literally was like, hey, is everything okay? Because I didn't really, I just brought it up to you. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't like mad. Like I brought it up in the same way of like, oh, I'm going to go get a drink, and you were not like, oh my God, I've offended him. And you didn't get defensive. You didn't get angry. You didn't get argumentative. You were like, oh no, I was just doing this thing. And so sorry about that. And I didn't need an apology. I was just more like, oh, is everything okay? Because I didn't like that. And you brought up things you didn't like on the podcast or things you wanted to change. And I think David's encouragement of me being my complete self all the time and not ever trying to push me backwards helps so much, because it helps me in my relationship with you, my friends, my family, not really. But I think they would like me to stop, but I'm not going to. What would you say is your favorite part with, yours and Justin's relationship? A lot of people don't get to hear about it. You don't talk a lot about it.
No, I mean, I think it would be the friendship. A lot of just the connection and doing anything and everything, no matter what it is. Whether it's going to the beach, doing a project like the chicken coop, or Matt loves when I bring that up.
Well, I do now. At the time, it was really difficult because we missed a lot of recording and filming, like unplanned. And then, because when you get wrapped up, you just like, I just didn't hear from you. And I'm like, hey, so we're not recording today. And you've already put your phone down and went back outside. And I'm like, I remember one time I was sitting at my laptop. It was during that week. I sat at my laptop for hours. I was working on other stuff, but I was only there primarily because we were supposed to record. And you're like, oh, hey, babe, so sorry, I forgot. I was like, I mean, I had other stuff to do and I just got those things done. But I was like, man, when you were like, we're done, I was like, I remember yelling across the house to David, they're done. And
I was too. Yeah, it does. But yeah, I would say that's if you were going to like do any one particular thing, that would be the key thing. And I think that would be for anybody, that's an ultimate key thing that you should have, ultimately, because if you have that, it makes everything else so much easier. I think it gives you something to rely on. It lets the relationship will fall back on that on hard days, because people have this idea that you're like madly in love with someone every day. And they think, oh, but I'll be there through the hard times. But you don't know what hard times look like if you haven't lived it. And sometimes it isn't catastrophe. It isn't, because significant events, everybody loses relatives. That's how it happens. That's the natural order of time. Eventually it'll be our turn. But leading up to that, you go through these family tragedies, crises, job losses, job changes, career changes. You went through that just literally transitioning out to California to be with Justin. And when when those things happen, those give almost purpose. Everybody they might feel a little awkward here and there, but it creates purpose. And so, it's either sink or swim, and usually people will swim at least to the best of their abilities, and that effort matters. It's the times in between that, long stretches of boredom, long stretches of, I don't feel like watching a movie tonight. I don't want to talk. I don't want to interact. And you have to be content with just sitting there. And it's your friendship that will pull it forward, and sometimes that friendship is, David likes to go to the movies and see movies that I don't necessarily want to see. So occasionally he'll just go see a movie by himself it gives me a couple hours to just completely myself, which can be great. Like when I was taking microbiology, those labs took me a long time. So it was a perfect time for him to go catch a movie, leave me to myself. And I had the house to myself. It was quiet-ish because, at the time our dog was still here before she passed. And so you have to be okay being independently, being an independent person too in the relationship. So, learning to be your own person as well as a team. And like you said, friendship is, David was he was like my bestie the day he came over. I remember the day he came to my house the first time. One, he thought I was my ex-husband's wife, because my ex-husband used the term wifey. And
I had interacted with David months before, but he didn't remember. He didn't connect. I knew who he was. I knew he was coming over for dinner. So when he got there, I answered the door, and he was like, "What freaky threesome thing is this guy playing?" He thought he was made friends with a straight married guy. He was like, "That's cool, whatever." It didn't have a sexual conversation. So he was totally expecting just to have dinner and hang out with this straight guy. And so I answered the door. I'm like, "Oh, hi, he must be David." And he was like, "Oh, hello." He never let on. But later when he told me about it, it was really funny.
Yeah, I mean,
it was very funny. But I remember him coming over, and the movie we watched was the old Nightmare on Elm Street, and like the original one. And I thought he was hilarious and funny. And the chemistry from our friendship was there day one, literally day one. And that was in probably winter of 2012. And that in 2012 on my birthday, he moved in because I needed a roommate. Because he didn't know it, but my ex-husband and I were already starting the process of separating. David didn't know that, but that was happening. The undercurrent. That was in the undercurrent. But again, we were friends for years before we started dating. And that's not the same for everybody. I think that I read a really fascinating article. This guy wrote about his wife. He goes, "I didn't love my wife when I married her." And it's not what you think. It's not meant that he just married her just because he believed he's loved with her. And, they had a wonderful relationship. But he talked about how over the time period of their marriage, that no matter how well you know somebody, when you're living in the same home with them and living through these life events together, it builds this history. And this is all assuming we're not talking about somebody who's abusive or toxic, because that changes it. With that, you're basically like, well, I've got all this time with them. Why go do something different? That's not the same as what we're talking about. But it was interesting because he talked about how, of course he loved his beautiful wife and how lovely of a life they built together and how hard they worked, and, how much he appreciated all the things she did and how hard he worked to maintain himself and the career and the things that he wanted to do, and how they encouraged each other. It was very beautiful and it's poignant, and then by the end of it, talking about how now these things have happened and how he sees her in a whole new light as he sees all the substance and depth to her and vice versa, and how much he learned about himself over these years. And it was very fascinating. And I think about that a lot when people get married. That, I knew David for 5 years, and we lived together 3 of those 5 years as roommates. Then he moved on with the boy he was dating for a long time. And eventually, when that didn't work out, he came back, but we didn't start even dating then. We were friends for another year and a half before we moved to Texas. And then we're like, well, when I was like, "Oh, gonna do this or not?"
I love everybody. If you have not listened to that episode with David, to go listen. And we talk about this whole specific kind of period of time. But I loved it. Like, I think David was like, "Yeah, I knew from the beginning." But then y'all both were kind of,
Right. Well, being friends does not necessarily translate to romantic relationship. I mean, the ADHD is real with me, and I'm very forward with what I think and feel. So if you cannot speak back to me or won't, we either have to put effort into it. You need to tell me how to communicate best with you. However you need me to communicate with you, even with my friends, I individually work to communicate with each person in my life, which is sometimes get a little overwhelming. But at the same time, I wouldn't have it any other way, because, like, there are days when I cannot approach Cody the way we talk on the ComaCast. Now, most of the time, though, on the ComaCast, that is how we talk to each other. We're just like, we talk about whatever, cat pictures, everything that we talk about. But there's other days when Cody's like, "Man, today is not a good day for me." And I'm like, "That's okay. Tell me how I can help." And I just ask, and vice versa. I have gotten comfortable enough that, I'll tell Cody, I can't today. I can't sit on camera and do this. Because, sometimes depression is real, and, sometimes you are puffy faced and you're dehydrated and you're exhausted, and, it just isn't working. And sometimes we push through it. Sometimes we are able to, and other times, if we have the space, we give each other the space. And it's interesting how love takes so many forms, and it doesn't just mean romantically.
Yeah.
And because sometimes a breakup with a friend can be so much worse than a breakup. Because sometimes with a boyfriend that, maybe they're not a terrible person, but it's not there. And you're like, well, you have the feelings, but it's not the same. But breaking up with a longtime friend or somebody that, it just hurts. You're like, oh, shit, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I guess when people think of that love initially, they think of romantic partner, but I get you are right, that it can go on to, obviously many times family, but friends. I think friends is an area that, that many people realize it. But, but I think that's
right.
interesting.
And when people start dating somebody and disappear from their friends, it's a double-edged sword, because sometimes people have really toxic friends and don't realize it. They don't realize that they're encouraging you to make choices that are not maybe the best for you. And it's really hard to walk away, because they may be wonderful people, but and it might be things that don't bother them, but they're detrimental to you, and sometimes it's the simplest way I put it is, I know Cody doesn't like to read. Therefore, he was encouraging me writing a book, but I never expected him to read it. My expectations of Cody as my friend were to encourage me and to not discourage others. But it's totally okay. He doesn't have to like to read, like, I didn't write the book for him. I wrote it because I wanted to tell a story, but he's my friend, and he's encouraged me to follow something I want to do. And sometimes it's even been at the expense of recording. Sometimes he's like, hey, do you have time to record this? And I'm like, I'm kind of writing right now, because when you're in kind of a zone, you kind of have to stay in that zone until it's over. Otherwise, when you walk away, it's not coming back. And, and that is him encouraging me. And then, of course, he decided he read it anyway, and I was really touched. But, but it means, sometimes love means supporting, even though it's not really your thing. It means supporting when you would really rather just run screaming down the street doing anything else but what the other person wants to do. And I'm sure Justin and David can absolutely attest to the times they probably wanted to run screaming down the street that nonsense we were up to. But you know what? They're strong, beautiful people.
And it's love. It's love. Well, within a relationship with a partner, I think it's also important. I think many people within our community judge this issue, and it's something, I guess that, wasn't talked a lot about. It's more so now, and more so not becoming like taboo, I guess, but like open relationships. And, you can still have that love in a relationship. And obviously it depends on, it may not be for you, but it may be okay for other people. And, I see all the time, on Twitter, people judging others' relationship if they're in a throuple or something. I have a friend who's in a throuple, and they are all three completely happy people. They're always like hiking, jogging. They have their dogs, they have their family, they're happy. Like, right. And so you shouldn't judge other people's happiness and what they have as love in a relationship setting.
That is an incredibly good point. Friends of mine that are a couple, and then eventually evolved into a throuple probably several years into the relationship. Gosh, they've been together for I don't know how many years at this point. And the couple has been together since I literally when I met them when we were like 18, 19.
Wow.
And then in our 20s, they kind of evolved, and they're so happy. They have a wonderful relationship. And, communication, Cody, I would say if I had to pick one point ever that is important in a relationship, it's communication without judgment, because if your partner or don't feel like they can communicate with you or say something to you without you judging, you're throwing up walls that, and that's not to say every topic can be just hit with a sledgehammer. Sometimes even though every topic is open, sometimes you approach it with a little more sensitivity. It's like, hey, I'd like to talk about this. It's a very open, thing. Dave and I share a lot of similarities with our parents. Like both of our moms had brain aneurysms, for example. So there are things that he just understands with how my mom interacts with me that isn't like how other moms interact with their children. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what it is. So when we talk about it, we're not, even if we're laughing and joking, it's different than say what we wouldn't stand up on a stage and joke about it or talk about it the same way, because it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody else. Between us, we understand. It's an understanding we have. And that was part of our friendship. That's something that I don't even discuss with you or anybody really else, because most people don't know how to process it because they don't really know what it means. So like love in that form is, hey, this is the topic. Or sometimes it'll just come up out of nowhere. This is a topic I want to talk about. Okay. And just goes on. And I think in couples, throuples, poly relationships, communication without judgment is just everything. Because I think it's a little crazy to expect one person to fulfill every one of your needs for all of your life. And that's just, I don't feel that's accurate. And the people that I have seen most loudly posting about that are often the ones in other guys' DMs or have alt accounts that are absolutely not the same thing they're espousing on their main account. And I'm not here to judge. They might have a reason for being that way. Family, how you were raised can make a big difference. So you might feel ashamed of this part of you, and you don't need to. Like people like to say that a lot of it is about just sex and sexual contact. And it's like, boy, you'd be surprised to know the percentage of people that struggle with ED or are not really interested in sex, or it's a very small part of the relationship. Wow, what a surprise.
And the thing is, you can still have love with that. I think some, people think, love, they like conflate the two, that love is sex.
Right. And that's absolutely not true.
And I think you're right. The communication is essential. And in that, the honest communication is listening is also important, because many people don't listen to others, even though they say they're listening, they're not actually listen. And in a relationship, it's very important to actually listen to what someone is saying.
Right. You're not listening. Don't listen to respond,
Well, I think this has been a good conversation. We didn't know where it was going to go or what form it was going to take, but love, it's intimate, it's fun, it's painful, it's a journey, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, heartbreak is real, and everybody has different needs, and it impacts and affects your mental health. But whenever I think of love, I don't always think of, usually romantic love does not actually rise to the surface for me. For me, it's kind of like love in general and all the forms it can take, and how each person kind of reacts to love. Some people run screaming. Some people love the idea of it, but they don't love it in practice. So it really just depends on the person.
Yeah,
Matt, this has been a fun conversation.
Yeah, Matt loves me, but I'm running. I'm so far away.
Yes.
No, just kidding.
He's not.
But yeah, so thank you all for joining us. We hope that you have love in your life with friends, family, partners. But we have a new episode coming out on Thursday, and then don't miss our live show Friday at 5:00. Bye, everybody. So, hey guys, we want to remind everyone that you can keep in touch with us on all of our social media channels, whether that is Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can do all of that at the ComaCast.
And we definitely love to interact and hear from all of our listeners. All of this is not possible without you guys.